So this is an analysis of Sherman Alexie's poem, The Powwow at the End of the World. I'm going to read through it first and then go back through it more slowly with an analysis at each point that I feel like there should be analysis, or that I was able to find something. The Powwow at the End of the World by Sherman Alexie. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after an Indian woman puts her shoulder to the Grand Coulee Dam and topples it. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the floodwaters burst each successive dam downriver from the Grand Coulee. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the floodwaters find their way to the mouth of the Columbia River as it enters the Pacific and causes all of it to rise. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the first drop of floodwater is swallowed by that salmon waiting in the Pacific. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after that salmon swims upstream through the mouth of the Columbia and then past the flooded cities, broken dams, and abandoned reactors of Hanford. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after that salmon swims through the mouth of the Spokane River, as it meets the Columbia, then upstream until it arrives in the shallows of a secret bay on the reservation where I wait alone. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after that salmon leaps into the night air above the water, throws a lightning bolt at the brush near my feet, and starts the fire which will lead all of the lost Indians home. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after we Indians have gathered around the fire with that salmon, who has 3 stories it must tell before sunrise. One story will teach us how to pray. Another story will make us laugh for hours. The 3rd story will give us reason to dance. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, when I am dancing with my tribe during the powwow at the end of the world. All right, so very first line, I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall after. So the I is, as I read it, the author, Sherman Alexie. He is Native American, and that then implies that the you, who is that? It's anyone who is not of Native American descent. And the tone throughout this poem is going to have a certain air of sarcasm to it, because the Native American speaker is saying, I'm told that I must forgive, and I will, once all of these terrible atrocities against my culture and the land are righted. And then we have, after an Indian woman. You are also going to notice, and as you heard throughout the entire reading, it repeats those words over and over again. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall after. It's repeated again and again and again until the very, very end of the poem, which we'll see. So then we have an Indian woman puts her shoulder to the Grand Coulee Dam. So when I read it, I underlined woman because I was a little curious as to why a woman? Why not a man? Why not a child? What's significant about that role? And this was actually one of my students who pointed this out to me when I was analyzing it with them. They pointed out there's this idea of woman as a mother. And I mean, we say it all the time, Mother Earth. So is it almost this juxtaposition of Mother Earth versus these man-made things? this culture that respected nature, lived by nature, understood nature, and was thriving because of that, is that almost talking about that woman, that Mother Earth, nature, finally being able to combat these man-made things that dam nature. Literally, in this case, a dam. So the Grand Coulee Dam, it's a dam built across the Columbia River in the 1930s to provide hydroelectric power and irrigation. I put footnotes on some of these references throughout here, which you'll be able to see in my pictures of my annotated copy of the poem, either at the beginning or end, wherever I decide to put it. Okay, and topples it. And so putting shoulder, it's talking about like when you are pushing something over, you put your weight into it by like putting your shoulder to it. That's what it's talking about. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the flood waters burst each successive dam downriver from the Grand Coulee. So if a dam is broken, that is an insane amount of water that will suddenly rush down a canyon or stream beds where it used to flow freely, but when you release all of it at once, it's going to come down in a torrent, in flood. And if there are further dams downstream, they will be burst by that extreme mass of floodwater. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the floodwaters find their way to the mouth of the Columbia River as it enters the Pacific and causes all of it to rise. So we know this is the Pacific Ocean now. We know this is referencing cultures living along. We know that this is referencing an area along the western United States. And then I circled rise because there's going to be another reference to something rising later, which I feel like there's some parallelism there. Parallelism being that they line up, they match, they are symbiotic. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after the first drop of floodwater is swallowed by that salmon. So that is a turning point in this poem. I also want to point out some ways that we can read into the use of salmon as a symbol. So if you know even just kind of a basic, or if you have a basic understanding of salmon, such as my basic understanding of salmon, they return to the same home generation after generation instinctively. And so I added the questions here, just something to kind of mull over, to chew on. Do human beings have this same animal instinct for a homeland even? Have we lost touch with that? And if we do have that instinctively, does it even apply anymore in this extremely connected world that we live in now? With the reference to the Grand Coulee Dam, I want to point out that it is kind of going to be putting throughout this poem, and just starting right there, side by side, fact and symbol. And if you think about it, is that not the way a lot of nature-based cultures view the world? They have a deep, intricate understanding of the way nature functions, of its seasons, of causes and effects within nature, and characteristics of animals and plants and everything. And those are all factual things that have also a symbolic, beautiful, metaphysical meaning within that culture and society. So throughout this poem, it puts fact by symbol. And is that not the way nature-based cultures also function? Having fact and symbol work perfectly together. Okay, so we're at the turning point, is swallowed by that salmon wading in the Pacific. Again, Pacific Northwest, West Coast. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after that salmon swims upstream. So from this, I want you to think about what it implies when something is reintroduced to an ecosystem, something that belongs in an ecosystem. What happens? And what happens when something is taken out of an ecosystem? And in short, it cripples the entire thing. Just as a basic example, we can look at Yellowstone, and I'm not an expert on it, and I won't pretend to be, but what I do understand is that because certain predators were taken out of Yellowstone, there was an overpopulation of other animals and herbivores that then over-consumed the plant life, and the entire ecosystem, the entire cycle was disrupted and ruined. And it's not until they reintroduced these predators, I believe it was wolves, back into Yellowstone, that they've really seen just the entire environment, the weather itself, the water, the streams, everything there really come back and really thrive and revive. And so in this poem, the salmon are being allowed to go back upstream, back up to its natural environment. And so we know that that is what happens when even an animal is taken out of an ecosystem. So with this point in the poem, as part of my annotation, I added what happens to humanity when people or a culture are either displaced or just completely done away with. Does it not have that same effect on humanity as a whole when an individual culture, a group of people, a society are either displaced or removed? Just something to kind of think about. Okay, so after that salmon swims upstream to the mouth of the Columbia and then past the flooded cities, broken dams, and abandoned reactors of Hanford. The abandoned reactors of Hanford, that's referring to a series of abandoned nuclear reactors along the Columbia River. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after that salmon swims through the mouth of the Spokane River as it meets the Columbia, then upstream until it arrives in the shallows of a secret bay on the reservation where I wait alone. So, why a reservation? Because that's what America did. Well, the government did. Sending Native American tribes off to these select patches of land as a place that they're allowed to still kind of exist and have as their own, because Europeans came in and took over. A sad thing that I want to point out, and again, I'm no expert on this, but it's just sad because if you think about it, is the government going to give the best land if there is a certain resource on a tribe's original land? that the government wants to use. And then he says we're away alone. I put a question mark with that. Is he alone because no one else is really there fighting for this anymore? Is it because the people are so displaced, just like the salmon, out of their ecosystem? But he says, I wait alone. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall. After that salmon leaps into the night air above the water, throws a lightning bolt at the brush near my feet, and starts the fire. So fire, hit my tree, classic, often symbolizes knowledge, inspiration, power, light. Fire symbolizes that as far back as fire you can find symbolizing knowledge in countless stories and legends and myths, which will lead all of the lost Indians home. So I circled lost, put an arrow up towards alone, because that's kind of explaining why he's lost. And I want you to think about whether it's lost so much physically, like they are physically lost, and also if it's a more emotional or spiritual lost. And then home, because again, this is their home. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall, after we Indians. So this is the first instance where the author definitively identifies himself as Indian, as Native American. We know right here for sure the speaker is Native American. Have gathered around the fire with that salmon, who has 3 stories it must tell before sunrise. So earlier when I said that the floodwaters will make the water rise, here we get rise again in the form of a sunrise. And again, I want you to think about the symbolic meaning and what a sunrise can symbolize. It can symbolize resurrection. It can symbolize new beginnings, a new start, a new morning. It's this hope for a new beginning. And then I think there's just something significant about the 3 things that it's going to teach. So off to the side, I just made note of what the 3 things the salmon is going to teach them will be. So one story will teach us how to pray. So first thing is teach prayer. Another story will make us laugh for hours. So the other thing is laughter. The third story will give us reason to dance. And so that is give reason for dance. And also realize in a lot of cultures, dance is a form of celebration, and it's also seen as sacred. I am told by many of you that I must forgive, and so I shall when. So this is where the repetition suddenly changes. And it's no longer I shall forgive or I shall after. It's I shall when. So is this implying faith that it will happen? It's saying when this happens, not if it happens, when it happens. I am dancing with my tribe during the powwow at the end of the world. So I put in parentheses end of the world because what is that implying? Is that implying it's going to take until the end of the world for this to actually happen? Will the world finally be righted once this does happen, and that will kind of be the end of the world? What is that talking about there? Is it implying something, post mortality? I'm not sure. So this is my analysis of the Powwow at the End of the World by Sherman Alexie.